This is Matt Regier with my EDL 854 case study, The Budget Debacle. First, a summary of the case. First off, who's involved? There's Mr. Santos, who's the Briardale Elementary principal. Mr. Barely is the Briardale Foundation president. Mr. Morley is the president of the foundation at a neighboring school and is in relationship with Mr. Barely. There's the school site curriculum committee led by a lead teacher, and the Briardale Foundation and the larger community. So what's happening in Briardale? This is a community with a K-5 school of about 600 students. It's one of 5 schools within its district, 5 elementary schools. The Briardale Foundation, newly chaired by Mr. Barely, raises funds for supplementary curriculum subjects. These include art, foreign languages, music programs, and Mr. Santos has provided Mr. Barely with some orientation to his new role as chairman. Mr. Barely organized a raffle for cash event. This is unfortunately illegal, and the sheriff came to the event and arrested Mr. Barely in what was to be a community event and was very exciting for the Briardale community. It really turned into a public embarrassment, not just for Mr. Santos, but also the school at large. There are definitely some legal and ethical issues involved in this case. A raffle for cash event is illegal, and that's true in most states, and it was certainly true in this one. There's a question ethically of whether the proper protocol was followed for approval of this event. Was Mr. Morley somehow involved in the raffle or in the report? Were there other parties maybe at play here? Really, while that's maybe an ethical question, the illegality of the event lends itself to make that somewhat inconsequential. And then there's also an ethical question of whether a parent should be chairing the foundation, and certainly one that's in competition with maybe another parent. So the case comes down to Mr. Santos and his ability to manage building finances while also regaining the trust of the Briardale community. He needs to do this not just in the area of building finance, but in the larger area of relating to the community and showing that he has successful oversight of the events under his control. So putting the facts together here, Mr. Santos needs to regain the trust of the Briardale community after the fundraising debacle that occurred under his watch. Part of this will include just allowing those supplementary programs to remain afloat while some alternate fundraising means are pursued. Mr. Barely, in an effort to raise money, conducted an illegal raffle for cash fundraiser, and the Briardale teachers, staff, and community are now both lacking funds and publicly embarrassed. The Briardale Elementary, again, it's a K-5 school, 600 students. It's located in a town in a diverse community. The school is the town meeting center. It's used for a variety of events, so it really is it's a hub for its community, and it's one of 6 elementary schools in its district. The supplementary curriculum is funded by donations from this Briardale Foundation. That foundation suggests curriculum, which is then approved by the school site committee. So parents are suggesting curriculum, the school site committee approves it. That's never been an issue in the past, and it is an established protocol. Art, music, foreign language, each of these programs is entirely funded by donations. And Mr. Barely also wants to implement an additional innovative curriculum on top of those supplementary curriculums. The other event here or a program that's involved is the raffle for cash, which again is illegal in this state and most others. So priorities, who will this impact? There's certainly potential damage to children, and they need to come first in all of our dealings as administrators. Children are impacted by a potential lack of resources here. Without these resources, they will lack their supplementary curriculum, and that'll damage their education. Mr. Santos, his position and influence could be impacted, and there's also a strong bond at this point between the school and the Briardale Foundation that could be fractured. There's some clear embarrassment here, and this is a debacle. So there needs to be some care taken to mend that relationship and help it to be fruitful moving forward. The stakeholders here, Mr. Santos, clearly. Mr. Barely has some stake in this. Certainly the teachers and staff and children at Briardale, and then parents and other donors to the raffle have some stake because they donated money and now they're not sure where it's going to. The people that should be consulted here and some other stakeholders, Mr. Santos is tasked with constructing a response. The school superintendent should certainly be consulted as the response is constructed, both on the financial side and also on the public relations side. And then the remaining Briardale Foundation members should be consulted as a path forward for the foundation is charted. Their opinions should be sought about maybe the things that need improvement with the foundation, and also about what structurally should be kept and what might work best as far as a better oversight structure. So what more can Mr. Santos learn before making a decision? I think he needs to know whether Mr. Barely was aware that this raffle was illegal. That may have something to do with how he accepts responsibility and what path he charts there. He certainly needs to know whether there's a financial penalty for the school or district. That will play a part in how he manages funding moving forward. And he also needs to know what will happen to the funds raised by the raffle. If those must be returned to their original owners, whether they could be turned into donations, he needs to know what's going to happen to those funds and what process the Briardale Foundation may need to go through in order to get those funds where they belong. And then he also needs to discover what options are available for the existing funds to be used on supplementary curriculum. Can he use district money to supplement his funding for that supplementary curriculum? Is he going to need to look for grants? Is there more money available, or is there leftover money from a previous year that might be able to be used? He needs to investigate those options before making a decision. So what should Mr. Santos do? I've outlined 4 options here, and the first is just to move forward without any change. Allow Mr. Barely to remain in his role. Don't discuss the event with the parents, donors, or community. Move forward as if nothing happened, as though it was just a simple mistake. A second option would be to dissolve the Briardale Foundation entirely and to raise funds exclusively through the school. This allows Mr. Santos to have oversight over every fundraising opportunity. You could ask a teacher to lead the fundraising efforts for the school and organize fundraisers for each class or each grade level so that each group has some ownership there. A third option would be to accept responsibility for the oversight, or for the lack of oversight really, and develop a system for improved oversight of the foundation. This would involve accepting responsibility for the debacle since it was under Mr. Santos' roof. It would involve attending meetings and providing guidance from an administrative perspective about the legality of fundraisers and some of the school funding restrictions that are really unique to schools in many ways. And probably asking a teacher leader to chair the foundation so that there's a school representative chairing the foundation. And then a fourth option would be to avoid taking responsibility, to allow Mr. Barely to shoulder that blame, but to still improve oversight of the committee. Attend meetings regularly, again, ask that teacher leader to chair the foundation, provide that guidance on legality and financial restrictions, but to avoid taking blame for that or taking responsibility for what happened. To evaluate these options, with no action, there are some pros. It uses a system that is already in place. The Briardale Foundation has worked well in the past, and minimal change might help this issue to fade quickly. If there's not a lot of change, this issue may fade away fairly quickly if it goes back to being a successful program. There are certainly some cons to this. The underlying issues are not addressed. Mr. Santos would certainly shoulder blame for future incidents based on his inaction after this debacle. There's no communication or discussion to educate the community, which probably will seem like he's sweeping the issue under the rug. And again, it doesn't educate the community, it doesn't educate the foundation, and the underlying issues are not addressed. No one knows probably why this was such an issue. There's also the question then of how funds will be raised for the current school year. It will take some time probably to gain that trust back and to get the ball rolling for fundraising again. So there would certainly be a gap in fundraising for the current year. Option number 2, to dissolve the foundation, also has some pros. There's a clear direction here, and it's easy to control from within the building what fundraising options are available and used. This could also promote some student ownership of fundraising programs, especially if teachers are willing to pull their students into the fundraising operations and maybe make a class fundraiser or even sell products that their students are building or making in class as part of their fundraising effort. There are some cons as well. It discards a system with many positive aspects. The Briardale Foundation has worked well, and so throwing that away entirely might not be advisable. The teachers will shoulder a big load if all fundraising is done from within the school. And could they fill a similar role? Could they raise a similar amount of funds? Could they fill a role similar to what the Briardale Foundation has been filling? This might also erode support for Mr. Santos from within his building. Many teachers are loath to adding too many more responsibilities to their plate, and it might also cause negative competition between classes or subject areas, again, possibly eroding support for Mr. Santos. The third option has the pros of some honest acknowledgement of a mistake. That's a positive usually in the long run if Mr. Santos is honest and open with his community and just says, we made a mistake and we're going to move forward, but with some changes to help prevent this mistake in the future, not just under Mr. Santos's watch, but under other future administrators. It also maintains the basic fundraising structure. The teacher chair and Mr. Santos can advise the foundation, but it makes use of that basic structure that's been so good for the Briardale School and for its parents and donors. This really is a happy medium that allows that structure to continue and makes use of it while also improving it in a way that will help prevent future issues. There are some cons here. There's extra work for Mr. Santos and at least one teacher. He needs to find a teacher leader. It maintains a heavy dependence on parental support that might wane at least some after this debacle. That's probably going to be a temporary decrease in support that will increase again once parents see what their funding is going towards. And then there would be a pause in funding, but there would be a plan for supplementing that. If there's a plan with that foundation of how to bring funding levels back up quickly, there's a pause, but with a plan. Finally, option 4, improved oversight can make a good thing better. That's again a pro. The teacher chair and Mr. Santos can advise the foundation, and Mr. Santos might avoid being blamed for this controversy. He might avoid that. He may not, but he might. The cons, not taking responsibility may be viewed as sweeping it under a rug. Again, there's more work for Mr. Santos and at least one teacher. And again, there's a pause in funding, but with a plan. I think it's pretty clear, at least in my mind, that option 3 is the way to go. Mr. Santos needs to accept responsibility for this, even though it wasn't entirely his fault. And he also needs to improve the oversight of the committee. This choice makes use of the current system and structure. It improves its ability to operate within the legal limits of a school organization, and it still uses that established system that's definitely best suited to fill this year's fundraising needs. The people are in place, their roles are in place. They just need a chair and someone to lead them and maybe an idea for some immediate fundraising. Accepting responsibility is a good first step to regaining community trust, and those foundation meetings that Mr. Santos will now attend are an excellent place to educate and communicate with parents and involved staff members. To implement this plan, he first needs to meet with his superintendent and discuss the plan. He needs to take responsibility for the debacle, discuss a public relations strategy, and then discuss financial options for the short term as they bridge the gap between now and the completion of their next fundraiser. He then needs to meet with the Briardale Foundation and again accept responsibility, explain the plan of action to prevent future mishaps, propose the teacher chairperson, educate the group about financial restrictions in schools, and have a discussion about some of the restrictions on those schools and ways that they can work around those or ways that they can make that work better for the Briardale Foundation. And then they also need to identify some possibilities for immediate fundraising to fill those needs that are important in their school for their supplementary education opportunities. Third, he needs to identify a lead teacher to chair the group. Preferably, this would be someone in an administration program or with some substantial experience. And this person could serve as a legal and financial buffer for the school along with Mr. Santos. This needs to be a trusted teacher and someone that's willing to commit to working with the Briardale Foundation, and probably someone that's going to be around the Briardale schools for a long time so that they're fully invested in that foundation. He then needs to meet with the supplementary curriculum teachers, or maybe with all of his teachers, so that everyone's on the same page. Again, accept responsibility for what happened. Then he needs to identify areas of urgent need to continue these programs. What are the purchases that must be made soon in order for the programs to continue. After that, he really needs to probably freeze most other purchasing, or maybe all other purchasing, until funds are available, at least for these supplementary areas. I think it's important that Mr. Santos does everything that he can to allow those programs to continue for the sake of the students, and to make the purchases necessary to allow them to continue. It's also realistic to acknowledge that there may not be funds available, and that purchasing might need to be frozen temporarily until a new fundraiser can be completed. Fifth, he needs to meet with the foundation again to decide on an immediate fundraiser and set those plans into action, and then to develop a need-based application for funding that will work in the future. I think this is important to move those funding opportunities beyond just parental suggestion, and to allow teachers that may have an idea to apply for funding, almost like a grant through the Briardale Foundation, that would allow them to apply for funding that would supplement their own classrooms. This is probably in addition to the parental suggestions, and I think in most cases that would be well received by parents. If a teacher has a great idea that they can apply for funding, that would be something that typically would be well received. And then sixth, he needs to share these new guidelines in the application process with his staff so that they know how to go about applying for funds. So what might happen? Hopefully the Briardale Foundation is supportive of this plan. Parents welcome the increased involvement in education. In my own experience, when I've attended booster club meetings and things like that, that's typically been well received. The new fundraising ideas come together quickly, and the bridge period between no funding and new funding coming in is relatively short. Those supplementary programs can scrape by for the short term. There's few immediate needs. Maybe there's some funds remaining from previous years or money available from the superintendent to help bridge that gap. And then the teachers are understanding. They're willing to kind of scrape by for a short time with the knowledge that things will improve quickly. It's also possible that it doesn't go quite so well. The Briardale Foundation may shun increased involvement from school personnel. In that case, I think Mr. Santos needs to reiterate the need for structural changes to avoid a future debacle. This is not something that anyone wants to be in the news for, certainly for their school. And so I think he needs to reiterate the need for a change. I also think it's important, if this is the case, that he accept suggestions for changes, so long as they'll fix the issues. If the parents have a good idea, or at least an idea worth considering that might help to improve the structure, I think that's worth considering and might be worth accepting even, as long as it's going to fix those issues. But at the very least, Mr. Santos needs to attend these meetings, or at least have a representative attend the meetings, and then sign off on every fundraiser to avoid a situation like this one. There may also be some great needs within those supplementary programs, or teachers that are less than understanding. In that case, he needs to explore alternate funding ideas with the superintendent. That might include applying for grants. It might include requesting additional money, maybe from capital outlay or some other source from the superintendent. But if there are great needs in order to keep those supplementary programs rolling, it's important that he try to do everything possible and allow his staff to know that he's doing everything possible to fill those needs. There won't be a perfect solution for this debacle, for this issue, but hopefully Mr. Santos is able to regain the trust of the Briardale community and allow the educational experience of the Briardale students to continue with the supplementary educational programs. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.